So we need to go a layer deeper, to download another kind of software that can help us for those moments that slip our attention, where we found ourselves already triggered, emotional, negative, right? Pessimistic, crying. And because we all have these thoughts and beliefs that we carry with us since childhood that keep playing a role, like mental viruses or malware that is, right, messing up with our experience and the experience of others. And you see all these viruses of the mind keep playing a role and influencing us all the time, robbing our emotions, our energy, our possibilities. And so is there another software that we can download based on the mind canvas that can help us, right, get control over that present moment again, like you well said, that control, so that every present moment becomes part of a self-empowering past. A past that's, right, that makes us feel good and we can learn from. A past that's makes us, we can feel proud of and enjoy right here, right now. And a past that gives us clarity and motivation and confidence for the future. And there is, and I call it Arise. It's a 5-step process, right, that gets you that power over the present experience. And it's called Arise because that's exactly what happens with your mind where you're using it. We arise from the negative stories and thoughts that ruin the experience for everyone. And we raise, we lift the quality of our thinking, and therefore everything else that comes from that. And so these 5 steps, awareness, responsibility, insight, shifting to the positive, and embodying, we're going to discover right now as I take you through a personal story. A story of one of the lowest points in my life, one of the darkest points in my life. And how this simple process not only helped me overcome it, but also literally transformed my life. And it all happened when I was working for my last employer, before I became an entrepreneur. And I loved that company. And everything was like a perfect fit, the people, what we did, training and coaching, and the vision, the values, it was amazing. But everything changed. Probably you know what I'm talking about when the leadership team changed. Who has been there? When they changed the top, and suddenly what happens? Strategy changes all of a sudden. What we sell, what we focus on, right? But most importantly, the culture changed. They brought all these fear-based behaviors as leaders. And I found myself in a company I didn't recognize anymore. I was miserable, to be honest. I even was paired with a manager that couldn't be more different than I was. I was this, intuitive, creative, sensitive Latino, people-oriented Latino, and matched with this rational, process-oriented German commercial machine. Yeah. Boom! So I was miserable. And even though I knew I had to leave and that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, really give it a good shot, for some reason I wouldn't do it. A year passed by and I kept postponing the idea, not even thinking about it, just miserable, sinking and boiling in that juice, right, of my suffering. Quite depressed, to be honest, and stressed. But my wife told me one day, and this is where everything changed, that she didn't recognize me anymore. I was angry, reactive, emotional, crying once a week, twice a week, out of the blue. And she was right. And because of that feedback, later when I went for a drive to clear my head that night, I found myself that she was right, that I was doing all these crazy decisions, and putting people in danger and actually even screaming to people on the street. And I almost created a crash, by the way, that could have costed 3 families their lives, including mine. And that's when I thought, it's done. Something is really wrong here, something needs to change. And so I came back a few days later, I called my company, took some time off. And days, I thought and reflected, what's going on? Why am I stuck? Why can I not just take the leap and become an entrepreneur? And the answer was easy and clear: fear. And that's exactly the step number 1, is becoming aware of how you're feeling. I'm going to just draw the 5 steps here. Becoming aware of how you feel. Because at any given time, what I mean is that if you don't know how you feel, you don't know, that's the door for personal mastery. You don't know what to do, right? You cannot fight an enemy that you cannot see. That's why it's so important to become aware of what you feel, right? And you do that by asking yourself the question as often as you can: how do I feel right now? That check. It's like having that antivirus that is checking if the system is doing well. And if you catch yourself on a self-limiting emotion, that's your cue to move to step 2, which is taking responsibility for the thoughts that you have that are causing that negative emotion. Your perception, your interpretation, not blaming others or life for how you feel. And so taking responsibility is actually seeing how you've been thinking from the negative quadrants of your mind canvas, right? And it's like the Carl Jung said, responsibility is about, recognizing and accepting that you are both the cause and the solution of the problem. And you do that by asking yourself the question, how am I thinking that is making me feel that way? Right? Imagine everyone would do that, how the world would be. Right? And so when I asked myself that question, something very interesting happened. It was the voice of my father from a conversation when I was 24 years old, 1 year into my career. And I was thinking about career paths, and he was an entrepreneur, so I was really considering being an entrepreneur. And he said to me, Juan, you will never be an entrepreneur. You just don't have what it takes. Nice parenting, right? And even though at that point I just believed him and I just forgot about it, that thought stayed with me for 15 years in my subconscious mind. I really never thought about it anymore. And it was influencing my every thought, my decision, and therefore my fate. But not anymore. Because as Buddha said, the moment you know how your suffering came to be, you're already in the path of releasing from it. Once I saw that thought, right, was creating my emotions and it was really influencing me, it was free to move on to step 3, which is insight. And insight is about looking at the facts behind the negative stories you tell yourself that put you and others in a negative emotional state, right? It's like Mark Twain, I think he said, check your facts first, then you can play and distort them as you want, right? And what you do here is move from those negative quadrants of your mind canvas to the neutral quadrants of your mind canvas by asking yourself the question, what are the facts here? How are those thoughts wrong? What is the truth, right? And help me out here. How was what my father told me wrong? That I was never going to be an entrepreneur, that I didn't have what it takes. Factually, what are the facts behind that? Is that true? And if not, how is that not true? He has no proof. Actually, he's dead. He doesn't know what I'm doing, right? Not only I figured that out, but also I went and Googled, what the hell does that entrepreneurial mean? You know what I realized? The definition of entrepreneurial was exactly how my friends, colleagues, and partners saw me. And the skills that are required to be an entrepreneur, many of them I've developed already in the last 10 years of my career. Now imagine you're me, you're in my shoes, feeling stuck with fear for so long. And now you see these truths. How do you feel?
Happy for you.
Right? Happy. But imagine that you are that person. You would feel happy at least, right? What else would you feel? Thank you, by the way. Invincible. Ooh, powerful, right? That's the power of factual thinking. It frees you, gives you that freedom to move on to the next step where you shift into the positive, right? To become literally invincible, not just think about it, but become invincible. And in this step, your mind is free to wander and explore, right? The learnings of the past, the blessings of whatever is going on, and the possibilities and opportunities behind all that. Behind the thing that 2 steps ago you used to call your problem, your hijacker, right? And it's like I write in my book, that any negative experience is just a positive one waiting for awareness to transform it. Any minus, you see that I've done this already, is a positive. Every minus is a plus, waiting for a stroke of vertical awareness. Right? You do that with your mind, consciously. And what you do here is move from those neutral quadrants to the positive quadrants of your mind canvas by asking yourself the question, what new beliefs, empowering beliefs and thoughts do I want to have? Most people just don't do that. And when we do that, when I did that, I chose to feel proud of all the skills that I've already developed. Grateful for all the ways in which I already was an entrepreneur. But also grateful for my father's thoughts and sayings 15 years ago. Because even though it felt like crap, without feeling like crap for so long, I would have never known how important this was for me. And I would have never dared and then stayed, no matter how difficult it may get, right? But most importantly, I chose to focus on all the ways in which I'm going to develop the skills that I don't yet have, right? Because I want to be an entrepreneur, and I will. You see, when you think like this, after being stuck with fear for so long, how would you feel? Happy? Proud? Relieved? I felt exhilarated, I felt confident, invincible, powerful, right? That's the power of positive thinking. And that allows you to go into the last step, which is embodying the new mindset. You embody the new mindset you just created. Because like Tony Robbins said, knowledge is not real power, it's only potential power. Only action is power. It's like when you're watching Netflix, and that episode ends, you see that button on the right lower hand side that says next episode, right? And it's filling up, and you know that you should stop. But what do? Absolutely nothing. Next thing you know, you're watching that episode, you're sinking deeper in your couch with that cookie jar or that bucket of ice cream or something, right? Feeling the right amount of shame, which is enough to make you feel bad about it, but it's not enough to actually do something about it, right? And that's the problem. So what you do here is ask yourself the question, how will I embody this new mindset? What action will I take? How will I act differently from now on? And in my story, a couple of weeks later, I had quit the company. I'd opened my own company. I polished and worked on these models and some others that I talk in my book. I wrote that book that became an Amazon bestseller. And I received an award as Coach of the Year 2023 internationally for the work I do with that. And even got invited to give a TED Talk last year. So not too shabby for someone who doesn't have what it takes, right, Daddy? That is the power of personal transformation. One thought that you catch and change 2 different realities.